Hey, lovely podcast listeners. If you're watching this on a video, you can see that I am in our glorious woodland and absolutely not in a cardboard box in my garden. Today on the podcast, I am talking to Laura Henry-Allain, who is an incredible storyteller, consultant, advocate, TV producer, so many things. We're talking to Laura about some of her creations, like her new book, Maya and Marley, her creation of the TV show Jojo Gran Gran, and also talking about the importance of having kind of conversations about diversity and representation in the early years. The importance specifically, Laura and I talked about how important it is to get those conversations in early and with children way younger than you might think typically of having those conversations with. So if you want to find out more about representation and about increasing kind of diversity in particularly the early years, then have a listen. And this is episode 196. If you are listening to this and you have enjoyed any of our 196 episodes so far, you can send us some questions. Wem and I are approaching 200, and for our 200th episode, we've decided that we want you to interview us. So if you have any questions for me or for Wem that you wanted to send us in, you can either send us in clips on our SpeakPipe on our website where you can record little voice notes. Some people have already been doing that and sending us loads and loads of stuff, and it's already been amazing. But if you want to send us a question, you can do that on theforestschoolpodcast.com, or you can send us an email at admin@theforestschoolpodcast.com. We would really love to be able to fill our 200th episode with questions from you guys. Maybe Wem and I will be interviewed by a guest host. Who knows? But without any further ado, enjoy this conversation with Laura Henry-Allain. Hey, did you know you can become part of the Forest School Podcast community by joining us over on patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast? You'll get exclusive access to behind the scenes content, have a chance to connect with us and with other listeners. Head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast to find out more about what we're offering over there. Laura, there we go. And we're here to chat about lots of different parts of your work. But specifically, I keep looking down because I've got this in front of me. I've got Maya and Marley in front of me that was very kindly sent. And look through, and we wanted to have a chat about this work. I do need to start off, and I want to get it on the record. When I said to my daughter that I was going to speak to Jojo, my daughter was very excited. She's 5. She's downstairs. She was a bit nervous and didn't quite want to come upstairs. I did say, "Do you want to come and sit? Because it's Jojo. You can talk."
Oh, she would. Well, when we finish, if she still wants to, I can give her a little wave and we can have a little chat once we finish recording.
Yeah, that would be amazing. She would love that. So, So I'm sorry, people are listening to that and going, "Who the hell is Jojo? That's a different person." This is one of your many other pieces of work. So you're an author and a consultant and a educational kind of person, and but for people that might not have come across or might have come across your work but not realized it's you, could you tell people who are listening a little bit about what you do? What's your kind of stuff?
Is she?
Who is this person?
So basically, I started my career within early years education, probably 38 years ago. I am quite old, and done a variety of positions in terms of working in day nurseries with childminders, worked with the health visitors. For my sins, I was an Ofsted inspector. I only lasted 2 years. It wasn't for me. That's why I only lasted 2 years, because what happened, I worked for a local authority and we were 2P'd over in 2001. Okay. And then I've been a lecturer, curriculum manager. So for the last 20 years, Lewis, I've been a consultant. So writing for the sector press, working with brands, training and consultancy right across the world within early years. Mm-hmm. And then in 2009, my dear grandmother passed away, and naturally I was grief-stricken, and I thought, what can I do for her memory? And I was remembering all these beautiful stories she shared with me when I was a little girl in my early years. And I thought, maybe there's an idea for a story here about a little girl and her grandmother. I work within early years education. Mm-hmm. I'm sure children and their families would love this. And I thought of the title, and Jojo Gran Gran Josephine is my middle name, hence Jojo.
I
So
see.
I didn't have to do that much research for the title. It was just there. Wrote a couple of books. BBC commissioned about 6.5 years ago, and 4.5 years ago, the show went live just a week before lockdown, and
Mm,
shows shown globally around the world. And I'm just super proud in terms of how the team at CBeebies, how they developed it, and everyone in the CBeebies team just so super passionate about Jojo and Gran Gran, and everybody I've worked with just been amazing to bring my idea onto the TV, you know?
mm. Do you have any like inklings about like and what particular thing it was about Jojo and Gran Gran as an idea that made people so passionate? I mean, I know I have my own thoughts about like what might have brought people to it, but like, did people?
I just think it's just shows that beautiful loving relationship that
Mm,
the majority of children have with their grandparent, whether or not it's the grandmother or the grandfather, and showing that beautiful relationship. And I think now many grandparents are hands on. So there's
mm,
that relatability factor. And
mm.
equally, because it was the first Blackbush animation, it was, and, I think a lot of people warmed to it. The theme tune, and so many people say they love that. I'm
I'll
super
be honest, I loved it
dyslexic.
initially. However, and my when man, the amount that my daughter has sung it, it's still a catchy tune, but there
Yes,
was a
yeah.
time.
So the colleagues, who worked on the theme tune, the singer, it's just beautiful. And I just think it's wholesome. I think if it wasn't my show, I would
Mm,
still watch it. And even I was at an event today in London, and parents are coming up to me, oh, my child loves this show. It's amazing. The emails and messages I get across social media. My gran would have been actually, quite humble. She'd have been thinking, what's all the fuss about?
oh, well, that's possibly quite a nice memory then to elevate those kind of like um not the kind of like bombastic big parts of a person, but to be like
Yeah.
this is actually what a uh lots of familial relationships are like, isn't it? It is the everyday, it is the like comfort things. That's the best bit of those relationships quite
Absolutely,
often.
absolutely. And the extension activities, because I think everybody in lockdown was making banana bread. There's episodes where children can make a bird feeder. So, even schools watch it as part of
Mm,
their curriculum because it's early years, and there's so much, the educational value is amazing in terms of learning opportunities. We've got, Diwali in a couple of weeks' time. There's a Diwali episode in St. Lucia, and we have Creole, which celebrates the St. Lucian Creole month. There's an
mm.
episode that's relatable to that. So children are able to learn about things that are local to them, and then equally to on a global level as well.
Hey, did you know you can do forest school leader training with me and with Wem down in our woods over here in Devon? It's this amazing course we do, 10 days long. I'm just packing up from one of our level 3 days right now, and I was just talking to someone and I thought I would share with you how this thing works. So our courses run in September. We kind of follow the school year. We do a couple of Mondays in September and in October. Then we have a bit of a break and we come back. We come back in the spring so that people can see the woods in 2 different seasons, so they can see the change as it happens. But also, the big thing, this is the big thing. Someone was just asking me on the course and saying, well, how much of this is you guys and how much is what's on the course? And so I thought, that's a really interesting question. So we've just done today needs and non-judgmental approaches and kind of planning sessions based around needs, different stuff like that. And I thought, yeah, that's interesting. What would be on the course? Well, on the course, definitely non-judgmental approaches. That's a key part of forest school. But that might just be, a 20-minute conversation. Hey, do you know At forest school, you don't have to tell the kids off when they're jumping quite as much. Maybe that's okay if they need to wiggle around a bit. Isn't that great that forest school can be non-judgmental like that? Job done. We did 4 hours this morning on needs and approaches and non-judgmental approaches and unconditional relationships and declarative language and co-regulation and just the depth that we went into to be like, not just to say, oh yeah, non-judgmental approaches, the absolute depth and like, digging into like needs and like behaviors, and maybe behaviors is communication, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a behavior that feels physically good, and so trying to work that out, and then taking all of that and trying to, as a group workshop, and put it into planning. Oh my god, it's been a joyous day. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, if you want to do your forest school training in a way that is deep content, not shallow content, not kind of skimming the surface. If you want to get some deep learning about forest school going on, come join me and Wem. You can find it at childrenoftheforest.com, or you can go to myforestschooltraining.com. I'll put all the links in the show notes for the podcast. But yeah, come on down. We would love to have you with us for the next cohort. Bye! Yeah. What's the process like of putting in those? Because there's a huge amount in like a lot of your work and in the TV shows and in the various books that you've put out. Obviously, like representation is like this huge, is like I would say, overarching theme to a lot of your work. What's it like having those conversations with something as big as like the BBC when you want to put forward these ideas of like, this we need to put the spotlight here, or we need to include this kind of thing? How does that conversation sound?
Yeah, I think the BBC they embraced, all the different ideas, not just from myself. There's probably about over 100 people who work on the show. So you've got the script writers as well who are bringing their ideas to the table, production director, A Productions who create the animation. They're based in Bristol. You've got their team who work on the show. And I think for me, everything that I do, diversity runs right the way through. It's super important that every child can see themselves, whether or not it's on screen or whether or not it's in a book,
Yeah, definitely. Actually, that's one of the things that I wanted to ask. So reading I'm going to hold it up again because I like it, because it's cool. Reading the Maya O'Malley one, and I was struck by. So I don't have it to hand, but we have My Family, Your Family somewhere in my house, just somewhere else.
Got it here, Exhibit A.
There you go. Hey, there we go.
I've been at an event today where I had all my books. Yeah.
So one thing that struck me as a kind of, there's a similarity and a difference between these two books, in that like the My Family, Your Family is like the diversity and representation is like top of the thing. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't pick up My Family, Your Family and be like, I wonder what the point of the book is, right? But the Maya O'Malley one, it occurred to me that if I was to read this as an audio book, I might not hear. You would hear some stuff, but you might not hear as much. But it's the illustrations of where was the one that I particularly wanted to find? The illustrations of pages like where you've got this whole gang coming together, and there's a huge one of like everybody on this one of the whole adventure playground.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I really wanted to ask you, like, what's the process like when you're creating these works? Do you consciously go, this is going to be really like diversity representation? You're going to know this from the start, and then do you go, okay, this one's going to be a little bit more. Well, I was going to say like subdued, but that's not the word I mean. I mean like.
Yes, I think that's a really good question, Liz. I know where you're coming from. So, look, every author works differently in terms of if you're writing children's picture books. The way that I work is I have in my head, when I'm writing the book, creating the book, what I want the illustrations to look like and feel like.
Okay.
So I will then use Google search, because I can't draw even to mock something up. And so Myra and Marley is based on my childhood adventure playground, Horniman's in London W10.
Ah.
So it's based on there. So I had photographs of Horniman's, other adventure playgrounds. I had images in terms of what I wanted Myra and Marley to look like,
Mhm.
etc. The goats. So they were all sent to Urea, who is the illustrator, who's done a really good job. And there's
Mm.
little hooks in there of Grenfell, because Grenfell's in that community. So on one of the pages, you can see some Grenfell hearts if you look at it
Oh,
closely. But
okay,
the other
nice.
thing I wanted to point out, Lewis, which is really important in terms of the representation, it's clear to see Mara and Marley are Black children. So if
Mhm.
one didn't have the book in front of you, and you've listened to it by audio, on the second page, if you were from the Caribbean community, you would know definitely that these two children had Caribbean origin, because Maya and Marley start the day with their favourite breakfast, cornmeal porridge. Maya loves the
Mm.
nutmeg and Marley loves the ginger. It reminds them of Auntie Bab's recipe from Grenada. So in terms of children's books, there was some research carried out 30 years ago by Dr. Rudine Bishop
Mhm.
looking at diversity and inclusion in children's books. And the term that she used quite beautifully is mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. So mirrors, it's important that therefore then children see themselves in books.
Right.
So hence again, Black children can see themselves in Mara and Marley. In my family, your family, that's the more of the diversity. That's mirrors. Then the windows is children then begin to look in and have that level of curiosity. And then the sliding doors is they step into that world and then they look at the similarities and differences. So children
Mm.
who haven't come across Cornwall porridge, that's going to spark some critical thinking, some curiosity. So they're growing up. What is Cornwall porridge? And so last week I was in um, Belfast, in a town near there, it escapes me, talking again about Cornwall porridge. What is it?
Mhm.
The similarities between porridge and Cornwall porridge, that you add spices. And a parent messaged me and said, but my child doesn't like nutmeg, so that wouldn't work for them. So
Mm.
again, children are learning to their cultural bank around language. So we've got the geography in there, we've got the history in for children to do that leaning in. Oh, they're learning.
Yeah, and that stuff is so like critical, isn't it? I know. I want like that's I hadn't taken. That's interesting. That I hadn't taken that in on that whole page. I'd just kind of gone like, oh yeah, okay, they're doing this, they're doing this, which might show my own kind of like biases or lenses, whichever I'm kind of looking at
Mm.
this with. Um, that does actually lead me on, because one of the things that I was uh, I'm going to say impressed, because if there's a word beyond impressed, I would like to try and get to that one. But so I saw that you had written some uh, work around introducing anti-racism into the early years. Now, as a group of people that don't necessarily have theory of mind, how the like those two like anti-racism, like incredible projects and all these things that are going on, and I've never heard of anybody. I've never heard of it going into early years. I've always assumed that it was a bit of a like very nuanced concept or a bit high. But can you talk a little bit about how that kind of plays out? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it is important. So, as well as writing a resource for early years educators, how to be an anti-racist educator, I wrote one for parents, how to be an
Right.
anti-racist parent. And so the book, My Skin, Your Skin. So when it first came, it's been out for 3 years now. Few remarks, I would say few, a small percentage, was around Lewis, children are too young to know about race. Children don't
Right.
notice colour. But we do need to have those conversations, because research informs us that even babies from 3 months old can tell differences in terms of skin colour. And when they get to age 2 and 3, there's other research. They're suggesting how children do know those differences in terms of race and racism. And as they get older, this is where sometimes we hear children can make racist comments. I've heard a somebody share with me in their early years setting that a 3-year-old said to the one of the teachers, "I don't like black men because they're robbers." So where has the 3-year-old got that information from? Yeah. So if young children are experiencing racism from an early age, and young children are saying racist comments, we have to have these discussions in a way that is age, stage, ability appropriate. But it's important that we can equip parents and educators and teachers with the tools in order, if there was an incident or a racist issue or incident that actually has occurred. And that's why we need to have positive representation in terms of books and resources within early years settings and within schools as well, and within for children who are home educated as well.
Sure. Appreciate that one. My own children are home educated. We've ticked some lovely things. That's sorry. Just to go back, some of that research. That's really shocking. That's really to be that. When you say at 2 and 3, they're aware of differences. Did you mean like culturally? But and they will have picked up preconceptions, or just by 2 or 3 they are starting to group different kind of human attributes.
They're able to have that level of understanding. And equally, I think it's a good point to bring in here the research that was done by Clark and Clark, the famous Dole test, and which was done just before segregation. And their research was used as one of the reasons why segregation, I'm verbally dyslexic, you know what I mean, is the reason why segregation had to end in the States. So long story short,
I've heard of the Dole test, but not in it. Can you tell in detail what?
Yeah, so I'll share that because I think it's really important for anybody who works with children to know this piece. And I showed it last week. I was doing when I do Twilight session keynote, and literally people are in shock. So even if when I'm sharing it doesn't matter the diverse makeup of the group, people just go cold and feel really uncomfortable. Then we can have a discussion and unpick it.
Rock and roll.
So the videos,
let's go.
To the videos. Now, I think it is important because sometimes I think people do need to feel that uncomfortableness to think, well, what am I going to do about this? So you have then the brown doll, and then the white doll. So then they do the research with children, talking to them, asking open-ended questions. And even the white children were saying the black doll is ugly, all negative comments. But then equally too, the black and brown children are saying negative things about the black and brown doll. So yes, that research was in the 50s and 60s, and they've done, researchers have used it over and over in time. But the propagation that I would say is, if we were to do that now, would it be the same? And I would say yes. I would say yes, that would still be the case in terms of how. And this comes back to, especially for our black and brown children, that poor self-image when we're talking about children having, that level of racial trauma, how it starts and how they have that negative feeling and that self-hate about themselves. And so hence why books and resources are important. That's not it. I'm not saying if you just go out and buy all the diverse books, that's going to be fantastic.
Of course.
We have to have the conversations with children. It's about more what we do as well with the books and resources, how we are, how we embrace that then as educators and teachers.
And is that where you think there's the scope for both kind of like we were just saying about the very overt, this book is about representation, and the Maya O'Malley, where it's kind of more just kind of inherent in the story.
Yeah, it's the joy. I think if I was to paraphrase you, what you're saying, so within My Skin, Your Skin, which I've got, because as I said, I've been out on an event today, so I've got all my books with me. So with My Skin, Your Skin, there is that bit about race and, anti-racism. But then equally too, I talk about the empowerment, so how we can give children a voice, within this book. So these are the non-fiction books, and then we have the joy of Maya and Marley, who are, a black brother and sister who are just running the adventure playground. It's outdoors, and I know I'm preaching to the converted. Children need to be outside more. And last week was recycling week, and went to a few schools and nurseries talking about recycling the environment, and it's about sustainability. So, well, actually, black children and black families, we do care about the environment. So this is just amazing. Yes, I wrote it, and obviously I'm going to be super passionate about
Of course.
but it's just, there's so many conversations. Because I don't know if you noticed also, too, I spoke about the street sweeper crew in the book, and we've got the
Yes.
community. And that came about, the street sweeper crew. I live in South London and my mum lives in West London. And sometimes the sat nav takes me along the King's Road in London. And I was stuck in traffic about 3 o'clock on the King's Road, and I'm looking, daydreaming, and coming along were the street sweepers in their orange uniform, about 20 of them turning into a road called Lots Road. And this was the beginning of when I had the, and I said, you know what, they've really got to go in the book, because I just think it's a really good hook. And equally too, showing people within working class jobs. How often do we see that, Lewis? In terms of that positive representation. So then that's evolved the street sweeper crew.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, that touches on so many things, doesn't it? I mean, if we're talking about like, uh, improving the kind of ratios of representation, the representation of black and brown people in the outdoors generally, not just in children's, but in all kinds of like, anywhere that we are obviously where we sit in terms of forest school, and we sort of sit a bit in the bushcraft world and a bit in the kind of outdoor hiking world and all these, and there are some incredible movements going on in those worlds to increase representation and like the visible representation of different groups. But the outdoors is particularly, it's not great. It's not great for representation, the outdoor world. And also,
Exactly, absolutely. And the countryside as well. It's not,
well,
there
and then
are
that ties into the street sweeper clue, doesn't it? Because it's not about, this book is not about going like, oh, if you're in nature, then that means the most idyllic rural countryside. That's what nature is. That's what being outdoors is. Adventure playgrounds and street sweeper crews and all these things are like, this is realistic outdoor access for lots of families, and I think that's great to see. Uh, some people, especially in the world that we do, could get very wrapped up in like the Enid Blyton kind of vibes of like ginger beer and gingham blankets and all those things. But to go like, well, that's not reality for lots of people. And so to see it represented, and also to see there's lots of stuff going on in the illustrations of this book that are like, the outdoors has got a particularly, the outdoor world and the bushcraft world has got a particularly bad habit of telling people the right way to be outside, the things you're supposed to do outside. You're not enjoying nature properly if you're not doing it, and quite often those are white heteronormative, all
exactly,
of those things. That's the
exactly.
bit that gets represented
Yes, yeah,
as
yeah.
like the right way to be in nature. So just to kind of again get more exposure of like, hey, there are other things you can be outside, and they're equally valuable and all those things.
Exactly, absolutely. And that comes back down to what we call about that whiteness as well, in terms of it's through that particular lens. And that's why many groups in society are by default excluded, because there's many things that you can do outside, in terms of bringing in that particular culture, and I do believe it's, again, the more conversations we have, how we can be solution driven, how we can make changes, locally and nationally and globally around these issues to make it better, as I said, for all children, cross-referencing back Dr. Rudin's mirrors, windows and sliding doors. It's not just for one particular group. It benefits every single child, irrespective of where they live and the communities that they come from.
Do you, I would like to ask you quite like a loaded question, and I hope you can appreciate this coming from like a good place. Do you think there's an element that is like, so there's been some stuff before that I've looked into about the outdoors and representation in the outdoors, and taking exactly the same activities and going, if people of different communities are doing, like if a bunch of white children in a park lighting a fire is more likely to get labeled as like, oh, they're rekindling youth. I remember having fires out in woodlands. Group of black or brown children doing exactly the same activity gets a very different social reaction, purely based on all the prejudices and stuff that are coming around. But do you think that is there a pressure to, because this book is about tidying up and like cleaning up the
Yeah.
adventure program, is there a pressure to be representing, oh, I'm going to use air quotes and I don't mean to, like better behavior if you are in those minority groups than you might be expected to represent if you were.
Yeah, I think, Lewis, I'm trying to paraphrase what you're saying
Yeah,
in terms
please
of
do,
I
because
can
I've
understand
waffled
what you're
there.
saying. I think it's about then you saying that how, you know, we shouldn't then stereotype and we shouldn't then have these biases against certain communities and against certain races. But I think that's always there, but unless we change with our hearts and our minds. So when I wrote the guide for parents, it had to be, I can't even remember the full title of it, my dyslexic brain. So when I co-wrote that with my colleague Emma, one of the things that we reflected on, I shared in terms of being anti-racist is a doing word.
Mm-hmm.
So, individuals may say, but I'm not racist, I'm not racist. But anti is a verb, so actually what you're doing. And one of the examples that I wrote about in that guide was, as a parent, it's sometimes what you do. Yeah, you may not say an offensive name against somebody within earshot of your child, but your behaviours may suggest otherwise. I.e., if you're walking down the street and a group of black youths came towards you, do you hold your child hand tighter or do you cross
Sort of
the
micro
road? So
behaviors.
your behaviours, your child is picking up, they're a danger. When you see an injustice of something maybe on the television and your child's watching it with you or you're out and about, do you call it out? So therefore your child can see your anti-racism. So you become an anti-racist family. So that's
Mm.
what I think is important for parents to do, is about thinking, what can I do? And it's these little things in terms of, becoming an ally, as it were.
Hmm. Yeah, and that can sometimes feel like, uh, and just situation dependent. That can be a very different amount of like mental load, I think, on
Absolutely.
parents.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I know it's something that like where I am in Devon, different ethnic groups, not hugely diverse down here in Devon. So they're like opportunities for those kind of anti-racism, acts and yeah, doing behaviours, um,
Absolutely.
are different in scope than if we lived in centre of Bristol or something, which is not that far, but it would change, you know, the
Yeah, and I think it's
expectations.
then about then again how you have these conversations because children see things all the time. So it's
Mm,
about then saying that how as a parent, as if we're, teachers, how the grown ups talk about these issues and, point out right from wrong. So one of the things I always say is that, we can teach our children right from wrong about a number of subjects. Um, Therefore, we should teach them right from wrong about racism, irrespective if you're in a diverse community or not. And it's even more important for children who are not raised in a
yeah.
diverse community that we have these. urgent and important conversations, you know?
I can remember like to give a personal anecdote. I think I lost myself for about 3 months when I was a newly qualified teacher, and the first ever class I had a child being openly. It was open racism because he would refer to
Really,
anybody that he saw who wasn't white as, well, they're not English. And
really,
but I had such a visceral reaction to it that I spent weeks setting stuff up every morning to try and like unpick, doing different stuff and challenging it and setting up different scenarios and like, uh, but I was aware that that was his only experience of those things, and the class was getting this kind of like, I was an NQT. I was doing the most heavy-handed,
really.
like I'm gonna change everything um, and to the point where I would put up like, I can still remember because it's burned in. I would put up pictures at one point. It was like silhouetted faces, and I gave information about the people. Their
Really,
parents were born here, they were lived here all their life. Their job is this,
really.
and then the next silhouetted face said, they were born in this country with their parents, but they lived in it. And I would go, okay, let's talk about, because that was their deal, was like, well, they're not from here.
Yeah,
So I go, okay, here's all the information. And then I would click the next slide, and some of them were black and brown faces and some of them were white. And immediately this child would switch and go, oh, no, they're not British.
yeah,
And even though 10 seconds before he'd been like, yeah, if their parents were here and they were born here, that's the thing. I was like, oh.
yeah.
And then I was just like, well, this is such a, one, it's an ingrained and like emotional response. I'm not going to unpick, potentially 8 years of this kind of like indoctrination stuff, but also uh, I'm doing like a 20-minute thing, and then he's going home, and the rest of his cultural diet is undoing or reinforcing everything that I'm trying to stop, which is one of the things that I think can feel like uh, a weight for educators to be like, I definitely want to do this thing, uh, you know, trying to factor that stuff in. And so I really like having books like Maya and Marley that are just, they're not heavy handed. They're not like,
Really.
here's the thing. It's just like, I'm going to tell you this thing. We're going to go on. That's fine. Just kind of not flies under the radar, but it's just in there. It's normalized
Exactly,
experience.
exactly. And that to me, you're saying that that child was 8, that comes back to this previous point I was saying about the research, the children within their early years. And one of the things that I do say, it becomes a whole community thing in terms of how can we support parents at home? How can we support children? And then how can we support the grown-ups who work with them um, on a day-to-day basis? So it's a holistic approach of everybody having that understanding. And everybody's going to be at different points in their journey. It's about we're all learning every single day to do better.
And is that, do you have like success stories of like you've kind of put that in place in communities and seen real change,
I
or is
think
it?
definitely. I think with a lot of schools, and I think especially since George Floyd, but then I think this was, 4 years ago, we were in lockdown. There were some people who embraced it, did a little bit of work, and haven't revisited it again. But then obviously there are some nurseries and schools that they have it as part of their values. You go in and you can see it within I can definitely tell where work's being done
Oh,
within
okay.
a nursery and school. As soon as you walk in, you can feel that.
Oh, go on. Tell me some of the
There's a
things.
school,
What are you
an
seeing that's
academy
like?
trust in Kent,
Mm-hmm.
and the CEO, I think they've got 10 or 12 schools. He's
Right.
bought a copy for every class of My Skin, Your Skin and My Family, Your Family. And when I asked him why, Gary Ratcliffe is the CEO, he said it's because in your books, my children are seen in my schools. There was another school that bought a copy for every single child of My Skin, Your Skin.
Wow.
So that obviously shows commitment. There are other schools who say, okay, then as a community, we're going to read this particular book about race and racism, because we're going to have it as a book club. So we're all going to
Mhm.
read this book and then come back and have that level of discussion. Yeah. When I deliver keynotes around this, linking to books and resources, it's always interesting to see the ones who are going to take it on a bit more. And I always say, you're not going to change what you do tomorrow. I wouldn't want
Mhm.
them to, because if you did that, that demonstrates to me that you haven't then truly understood what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, digested
But
it,
we need to be
internalized.
thinking, what are we doing short term, medium term, and long term? And it's ongoing all the time. But I think that the starting point, even if you are a parent, educator, or teacher, is you've got to start with your values. What are your values? And what do
Mm.
I want my children or the children who I work with on a day-to-day basis for them to have, to be raised anti-racist, so they get to be adults and we don't see some of the problems like what we saw, the
Mm.
awful instances in the summer in terms of the rioting.
Yeah, and I saw the other day that it has. I don't know if you saw it. It's come up again in the
Mm.
next county. A police officer went into a school and reenacted it in front of a class of high school students by putting a black student on the floor and kneeling on them to show
Oh my
what's
goodness
happening.
me.
It's unbelievable. And this was a month ago, uh, and apparently was in there trying to explain to the class why it wasn't a lethal restraint. It's yeah. This is so. Yes, lots of people have done lots of work. However, and
Yeah, and
it
this
was
is it. And hearing stories like that, that poor child who had to experience that, imagine the racial trauma that's going to be on that child now. And this is why we have to do this work and work with people like the
absolutely.
police, the education community, politicians. It's, it takes, that everybody to be invested in this and not one person to take it on board, you know?
Mm. No, I'm conscious of time, but I would love to just to circle it back to where we started. You were talking about some examples there of schools that had really like embraced this kind of work, and really you can see that it had gone in. Do you have a sense of what your gran might have thought if you could take her into those schools?
Yeah, I think she would be really surprised, because even from last week, a school shared with me a display on Jojo Gran Gran. So they were asking me some information and they said, oh, we want to do it on Jojo Gran Gran. I think, again, she just would have been so humbled. She would have been thinking, what is all the fuss about?
Hmm.
That's why I think she would have been, that's what she would have been thinking. So that's what
So,
I would say. I would say that she would have been thinking, um, yeah, she would have said that's on her, because when we used to go back to St. Lucia,
mhm.
St. Lucia is a beautiful place for outdoors. We've got a volcano
Oh,
in St.
nice.
Lucia. There's a volcano in St. Lucia and lots of natural places of beauty. I'm just looking up at her picture here. And when I used to go back to St. Lucia when my sons were little, um, she used to say she used to sit on her veranda and she used to say, oh, this is my granddaughter Laura. She works with children.
Oh, wow.
So she was
Wow.
delighted that um, biologically she only had two children,
Right.
but she had so many other children who were her children. And
Mm.
she adored children. When she was living in the UK, she was part of that Windrush generation. When she went back, she
Ah,
was like an unofficial childminder. So she
right.
loved children. So for her to say, to her friends walking past, this is Laura, she's come from England to visit me. She works with children. So she was super proud at that point, right?
Right. Yeah. Oh, incredible. Um, Laura, if people have listened to this and they want to find out more about your work and what you're up to, where can people go? Where can people find out more stuff?
Yeah, I'm on the socials at Laura H. Elaine. My website is www.LauraHenry-Allain.com, and then the emails. I'm all, ready. Like I said, I do visits. I could come to your
Oh, yeah.
homeschooling right in the forest school. I do story sessions in libraries, schools, festivals, keynotes, training for parents, teachers, organisations, as well as writing books as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for
No,
chatting
you're
with me this
welcome. You're
evening, and thank you for the
welcome.
books and like in general for putting the books out into the world. It's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and look out for Myron Marley book
Yeah.
2. It's going to be a series. So look out
Ooh.
for book 2. Maybe in about 18 months' time is book 2.
Oh, exciting. There we go.
Yeah.
Welcome back, podcast people. I am back in the box, in the woods, and absolutely not in a cardboard box. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. So many incredible moments in there. So many profound questions, and also I do want to say massive shout out to Laura for really welcome me into a space where I felt that I could ask some of the questions that I really wanted to answer, and that she answered in such an honest and kind of transparent way, and it was such an enjoyable conversation. I hope you guys have got a lot out of it as well. I hope you've thought about some different conversations that you might need to have or that you want to have with your groups, maybe got some ideas of different ways you want to include diverse representation in your forest school settings, and loads of other juicy things that came out of that topic. I will say again, if you have any questions for me or Wem for our 200th episode, you can get those to us on theforestschoolpodcast.com or send us an email, admin@theforestschoolpodcast.com. We would really love to have those questions. Oh, shout out to everybody that's supporting us on Patreon already, patreon.com/theforestschoolpodcast. You can help us support and keep this podcast going from as little as £2 a month. We're doing loads of stuff over there. I've started putting up these reflective exercises. So I take the whole podcast that we've just put up, and then I go, let me think of some exercises that people could do, some reflective stuff that we could do as practitioners. And then I put that out over the week on Patreon. So if you're thinking you want to support the podcast, but also that you want to kind of extend your own learning and you want to improve your practice, come and join us on Patreon. We would really love to have you over there. Patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast. And if not, we will see you next time. Stay wonky.